Hey friends, Chris here again. I want to talk to you today about setting up a key component of your home lab for local development, and that's a Nexus server. And the reason I want to set up a Nexus server is to host Docker images. We're going to set up two kinds of Docker repositories in Nexus today. One is going to be a cache of the Docker hub, and another is going to be a private Docker repository. We'll see why those two things are important in a moment. First of all, everything I'm going to cover comes out of this GitHub repository here. There isn't a whole lot in here, but you can use it as a reference after you watch this video. The link is in the video description below. So of course, I assume that you have Docker and Docker Compose already installed. And if you look at this repository, there is really nothing in here. There's a Docker Compose file, and even the Compose file is extremely simple. I just want to point out a couple things. First of all, I'm exposing these 3 ports. As you grow your home Nexus server, you may want to expose more and more ports. What we have here is 8081 is going to be the web port. That's how I'm going to access the UI. And 82 and 83 are a couple of repositories. 82 is going to be my Docker Hub repository. 83 is going to be my private repository. The other thing I wanted to point out is I've got a volume mount here. And I'm pointing to a directory called volume, which is directly in this repository. And at the moment, volume is empty. You know, you can run this with a standard Docker Compose up. I've also provided a convenient script called run.sh. And what I'm doing is I'm opening up full permissions on the volume directory. And I'm doing that because in certain environments, I notice on Linux anyway, I needed to do that to allow Docker to properly use that directory. But, you know, if you're running it in Windows or on Mac OS, you likely don't need to do that. First of all, for this demonstration, I'm going to run this on a server machine on my home network. You'll notice I'm SSH'd into this machine cbm450s.local. You know, you could run this on localhost as well, but you're probably going to want to run this on another machine on your network anyway, because you want this to be a permanent fixture in your lab network. So to get started, I'm just going to run the run.sh file. Okay, and that would have created, you can see the volume is starting to get filled up with things as Nexus initializes. Now I'm just going to open up another terminal window here, and we're going to look at the logs as the thing comes up. And what I'm looking for in the logs is the fact that Nexus has started up. So once it's started up, I can access it. So as I mentioned, port 8081 is going to be the location of the Nexus server. So for me, I'm going to hit that machine on my network. You might be running on localhost. You could use localhost 8081. And here we are. We're in Nexus. So we're going to log in the first time with the admin user. You'll notice that it says the password for the admin user is a Nexus data admin password. And it just so happens that that's right here. For you, it'll probably be different. So just to point out, of course, Nexus data is the volume directory in this repository. And on first login, it's going to ask me to change my password. So I'm just putting in a simple little password. And if you choose, you could enable anonymous access. You may want to do this. I'm going to have a Docker Hub cache, and so it may be worthwhile to allow anonymous access. So you don't always have to log in order to pull public images. All right, so I'm logged in. I've got an admin user, and I just want to show the concept of what we're going to do next. So typically with Docker, if I do a Docker pull, it just pulls directly to Docker Hub. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create a proxy to the Docker Hub in Nexus. It's going to run on port 8082. If I do a pull against my Nexus server at port 8082, it's going to check if we already have the image locally. And if we do, we're going to return that image back to Docker. If we don't have the image, it will go out to Docker Hub, and it'll pull it in, but it'll save it. And the key thing here is, I don't know if you're aware, there are pull limits on Docker Hub. If you have CI/CD, like any automated build, and you're doing many, many builds a day, it's possible, it's feasible you could hit the pull limits on Docker Hub. If you try to pull an image, even if the image hasn't changed all day, that still counts against your pull limit. So this way, if I do a pull, I'm going to pull against my Nexus server. Since the image will be cached after the first pull, I won't be counting against any pull limits on the public Docker Hub. So let's go over to this gear, and we're going to create a blob store. It's just a location for storage inside Nexus. And we're going to create a new one of type file, and we're going to call it Docker Hub. I just want to point out where this is going to land. Remember, Nexus data is effectively the volume directory, so I create that, and that's where it lands. I also need to set up a security realm for Docker Hub, this Docker bearer token realm. This allows me to do an anonymous pull into it without logging in to Nexus. Finally, I'll go to repositories and I'll create a repository, and it's going to be a Docker Proxy repository. We'll call it Docker Hub. We'll run this one on port 8082. If you remember, that's one of the ports I've got open here. I'm going to allow anonymous pull. And I need to enter the URL for Docker Hub. Now, what's the URL? If we look back in here, this right here is the URL. And for the index, I'll say use Docker Hub. And check out this some of the settings here under maximum component age. This is how long in minutes we're going to cache before rechecking the remote repository. So 1440, that's 24 hours. So what that means is after 24 hours, if I'm pulling the latest version of an image, Nexus is going to go and check Docker Hub again. You'll get one more hit in Docker Hub, which will count against your pull limits, but that won't hurt you at all. And finally, we need to select a blob store, which is the one that we just created, Docker Hub. And we just create the repository. Now, once we've done this, the repository is ready to go. So I just want to show you an example of this. So here I am on my local machine. And what I'll do is I'll do a Docker pull. And I need to pull some image from Docker Hub. Well, let's go look and see what's out there. I just search for something very common like Ubuntu. It's an official image. And so normally I would just do a Docker pull Ubuntu. What we're going to do instead is we're going to do a Docker pull of either localhost or the name of the machine where your Nexus repository is running, and the port, and then the normal image name. In this case, it's just Ubuntu. It could have been like Ubuntu/Ubuntu or something like that, right? So you just append that at the end. And of course, I do need to remember to run Docker Desktop. And there is actually something else I need to show you here. If you're running in macOS or on Windows, you'll want to go to the gear icon on Docker Desktop, click on Docker Engine. And in here, we need to make sure that Docker is aware of this repository because we haven't enabled SSL or HTTPS, and we need Docker to be kind of okay with that. So what you need to do is you need to add a section called Insecure Registries. And that's an array. So in my case, it's CBM 450S local 8082. I'm going to add another one here because we're going to create a second registry on 8083. There. Don't forget your commas. And then do an apply and restart. And what do you do if you're just running on bare Linux? I just want to point out this CBM 450S machine that I'm connected to is a Linux machine. And what you would do is you would do a vi or a sudo to etc docker, and then there's a file called daemon.json, and you would just add a bunch of insecure registries in there. Okay, so I added these sections to my Docker config. Let's try pulling that again. Okay, so I pulled Ubuntu latest from my Nexus repository, and we can go have a look at our Nexus repository. If we go to this little browse, we go to browse and look at Docker Hub, we'll see in here that Ubuntu is in the library. So now every time I pull Ubuntu, it's going to pull directly from this cache rather than going out to Docker Hub. But as long as I always pull through my Nexus repository, I'll always have a nice cache in my local network. So that's a Docker Hub cache. What about if you want to store your own private images? You don't want to publish them to Docker Hub, but you do want to publish them somewhere. After all, if you're running a lab development network in your home, you may be creating a Docker image on your development laptop. You want to push it somewhere into a repository so it can be then extracted or referenced again by another machine that may run the image. So let's go create a private registry. Go to the blob stores again. We'll create a new one. We'll call it Docker Private. Go to repositories. We'll create a repository. It's going to be a Docker hosted repository. I'll call it Docker Private. We're going to run this one on 8083, which is another one of these ports that I've already reserved. I'm not going to allow anonymous pull on my private registry because, I don't want anybody being able to get the images unless they've got credentials. And we'll select Docker Private as the blob store. And that's it. So now how do we use that? As I mentioned, that one's running on 8083. So let's talk about maybe creating an image. Now, in my last video, I created an image for Kubernetes deployment. I'm just going to use this as a demonstration. In that project, I had an image build shell script, which did a Docker build, and it tagged it as Echo Service Latest. What I can instead do is, rather than name it just some bare name like that, what we would do is we would put in front of it the name of the repository and the port, and then you do a slash and then the name of the thing. So I'll save that. We'll open a terminal. I'll do an image build. Okay, so that's built, and it's tagged as CBM 450S local 8083. And so I'm going to want to push this to the remote Docker registry. Okay, and in order to push this image, first I need to log in to my private repository. I'll do a Docker login. You specify the location of the private repository. In my case, it's on 8083. I'm going to log in with the admin user, which is way overkill. You probably are going to want to create a user appropriate for this. Okay, and I'm logged in, and now I can actually do a push. And I'm going to push this image, which I just built. And away it goes. So there, that's pushed. And now let's have a look. If we go back to browse, we can look at Docker private, and the Echo service is in there. So that's basically all I wanted to show today, just to get you very quickly up and running with a Nexus repository for Docker access. Now, the private repository is an interesting one. This one's running inside my local network. What if I'm running things in the cloud, either on AWS, Google Cloud, or on Azure? What am I going to do? How am I going to give access to my private repository? Can I do that in a secure way without just opening my private repository up to the public internet? There is a secure way. I'm going to cover that in the next video. But for now, that's all I've got, and I hope this was helpful for you. I'll see you next time.